Over the weekend, President Trump was asked whether he needs to uphold the Constitution as he pushes forward with a massive deportation program.
Because of President Trump's tariffs, with hard-hit truckers taking another blow.
I got to pay bills, I got to pay child support, I got to go to court next week. What I'm supposed to do?
More than 12,000 American workers lost their jobs as factories across the country shut down in rapid succession. This wave of closures came in the wake of failed trade negotiations and the sudden enforcement of import tariffs reaching as high as 145% on key materials and components. Once intended as leverage in international trade deals, these sweeping tariffs have instead sparked a domestic crisis, one felt most immediately on the factory floor. Across states like Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the fallout is visible and raw. Inside once bustling manufacturing plants, conveyor belts have stopped mid-shift. The mechanical whir of production lines has been replaced by silence. Lights flicker in half-abandoned warehouses. In parking lots, workers stream out carrying cardboard boxes filled with personal belongings, coffee mugs, safety goggles, photos of family taped to lockers just days earlier. Some linger outside the gates, stunned. Others get in their cars unsure where to go next. This isn't the result of technological change or a natural downturn in demand. It's the product of political choices of trade policies crafted at podiums and in press conferences with little understanding of how deeply they cut into the foundation of American industry. And now the cost is being paid not by the officials who signed the orders, but by the families who relied on these jobs to survive. Across the American industrial heartland, factories are shutting down at an alarming pace. In states like Ohio, Michigan, and Texas, production facilities that once hummed with activity in sectors ranging from automobiles and electronics to steel and heavy machinery are now falling silent. These closures aren't the result of automation or a drop in consumer demand. They are the direct consequence of mounting costs triggered by new trade tariffs and the collapse of key international agreements. As import duties on raw materials and components surged, many manufacturers found themselves priced out of profitability. Steel and aluminum, essential inputs for countless industries, have become significantly more expensive. At the same time, retaliatory tariffs from other countries have limited export opportunities for American-made products, reducing demand for domestic production. With little warning, companies are being forced to make hard decisions, scale back, shut down, or shift production overseas. For some firms, the path of least resistance has been offshoring. By relocating production to countries like Mexico, Vietnam, or Thailand, they can avoid the new tariffs, access cheaper materials, and maintain access to global markets. But while this strategy may protect company margins, it leaves American workers behind. Skilled employees, many with years or even decades of experience, are being laid off through no fault of their own. The irony is stark. Despite widespread concern about automation taking jobs, the current wave of factory closures is being driven not by technology, but by trade policy. Decisions made in Washington under the banner of economic nationalism are now dismantling the very industrial base they claimed to protect. For working-class Americans, the reality is simple and painful. Their jobs are not being replaced by robots, but erased by tariffs. Before starting the next part, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more breaking news. The impact of the trade war extends far beyond factory gates. It reverberates through every link in the supply chain, from raw material suppliers to retail storefronts. As new tariffs take effect, the cost of essential inputs, aluminum, steel, semiconductors, and industrial components has surged. While exact increases vary by sector and source, many businesses report price hikes between 30% and 80%, especially for goods sourced from heavily tariffed regions like China or the European Union. But the rising cost of raw materials is only the beginning. Packaging, shipping, insurance, inspections, mummings, and compliance testing have all become more expensive, either due to direct tariffs or secondary effects like longer delivery times and tighter import controls. For larger corporations with diversified supply lines and global purchasing power, these increases can be managed, absorbed into higher prices, or spread across international operations. For small and mid-sized businesses, however, the situation is far more precarious. These companies often operate on thin margins and rely heavily on specific suppliers or logistics routes. Many lack the financial flexibility to retool sourcing strategies or renegotiate long-term contracts. As costs rise, their ability to compete both domestically and internationally shrinks rapidly. Some are forced to raise prices, alienating customers. Others delay orders, reduce staff, or shut down entirely. The ripple effect is devastating. A machine shop in Pennsylvania struggles to source affordable steel. A consumer electronics startup in California halts production due to chip shortages. A A regional furniture manufacturer in North Carolina closes after packaging costs triple. These aren't isolated failures. They're systemic consequences of a tariff regime that underestimated how deeply modern businesses are embedded in global supply networks. At the core of this crisis is a hard truth. The supply chain isn't a straight line, it's a web. Pull one thread too hard and the whole system frays. That's exactly what's happening now. And without meaningful policy correction or global cooperation, many smaller businesses may not survive the year. At the heart of the current economic disruption lies a trade strategy that promised strength but delivered chaos. In an effort to assert economic dominance and revive American manufacturing, the U.S. administration under Donald Trump implemented sweeping import tariffs, some reaching as high as 145% on a broad array of goods from both strategic rivals like China and traditional allies such as the European Union. What was framed as a forceful push to protect domestic industry has instead triggered a chain reaction of retaliation, broken agreements, and global distrust. The intended message was clear: bring production back home, punish trade imbalances, and reduce dependency on foreign supply chains. But the world did not respond with capitulation, it responded with countermeasures. Major trade partners, including the EU, India, and Brazil, either withdrew from negotiations or imposed their own tariffs in response. Several scaled back imports of American goods, particularly agricultural products and industrial equipment. The result, U.S. exporters were hit from both sides, rising costs for inputs and shrinking demand abroad. Meanwhile, the World Trade Organization WTO, the traditional body for resolving international trade disputes, has been left effectively powerless. The U.S. has continued to block the appointment of new judges to the WTO's appellate body, rendering the system incapable of arbitrating conflicts or enforcing rules. With no functioning multilateral framework, countries have turned to bilateral retaliation or formed new trade alliances that bypass the U.S. entirely. This approach may have been intended as leverage, but it has isolated the United States rather than elevated it. Trade is no longer a cooperative engine of growth, it's a battlefield of tit-for-tat policies where global trust has eroded and American credibility has diminished. The deeper irony is that while tariffs were sold as a tool to restore U.S. power, they've ultimately exposed how interdependent and globally embedded the American economy truly is. In severing ties, the U.S. has also severed access to markets to supply chains to influence. And as other nations move on, the U.S. risks being left behind not because it can't compete, but because it chose to compete alone. While the domestic impact of U.S. trade policy is severe, the global consequences may be even more enduring. As tariffs and nationalist rhetoric reshape America's role in international commerce, foreign governments and companies are quietly and decisively moving on. With trust in the reliability of U.S. trade commitments shaken, the world is rebuilding supply chains and striking new agreements that intentionally exclude the United States. One of the clearest examples is China's pivot to Brazil. Once a top buyer of American soybeans, corn, and beef, China has significantly deepened its agricultural ties with South America. Brazilian exports to China have surged, bolstered by long-term infrastructure investments, currency agreements, and a clear signal China no longer views the U.S. as a stable or preferred supplier. This shift has permanently reduced U.S. influence in a critical global market, one that American farmers once depended on. The European Union, facing tariffs on its steel, aluminum, and luxury exports, has taken a similar route. Rather than continuing drawn-out negotiations with Washington, the EU has focused on securing bilateral trade deals with other partners. In recent years, it has finalized agreements with Canada, South Korea, and Japan, strengthening its economic integration with countries that offer both market access and regulatory alignment without the unpredictability of U.S. trade policy. Meanwhile, global supply chains, particularly in sectors like electronics, automotive, and pharmaceuticals, are being re-engineered to minimize exposure to the American market. Companies that once relied on U.S. port suppliers or regulatory structures are now investing in redundancy and diversification. They are de-Americanizing their operations not out of hostility, but out of risk management. In a world where U.S. trade decisions can swing sharply with every election, long-term stability now lies elsewhere. This isn't just a shift in strategy, it's a shift in confidence. America was once seen as the anchor of global trade, reliable, rules-based, and open. That perception has eroded. In its place is a new reality. The U.S. is increasingly viewed as unpredictable, transactional, and prone to unilateral disruption. And in global commerce, trust is everything. As the world redraws its economic map, the U.S. finds itself no longer at the center, but on the periphery watching deals get signed without it. While trade wars play out on global stages, the real cost is landing quietly in American homes on receipts in shopping carts and through vanishing choices. Across the country, prices for cars, smartphones, and appliances have jumped between 10% and 25% as import costs ripple through supply chains. At the same time, once plentiful options are shrinking. Shoppers are finding fewer models, fewer brands, and more out-of-stock notices, not just in specialty markets, but across everyday essentials. This isn't an abstract economic shift. It's direct, visible, and painful. A new fridge costs hundreds more. A phone upgrade is delayed. A replacement part takes weeks to arrive. And most people don't even realize the cause policies meant to protect American industry are instead raising prices, limiting access, and punishing the end user. The irony is sharp. Tariffs were sold as a win for American consumers. But in reality, the strategy has created a loop where workers lose jobs, businesses lose suppliers, and families pay more for less. It's a hidden tax built into every checkout total. And it's one that's quietly reshaping how Americans live, shop, and budget without delivering the stability or prosperity they were promised. This wasn't just a trade war. It was a quiet economic unraveling, one that started in policy rooms and ended in paychecks, prices, and lost livelihoods. Factories shuttered, supply chains cracked, allies walked away. And consumers, they're left holding the bill. Tariffs were supposed to protect American industry. Instead, they've made it harder to build, sell, and simply live. And yet the hardest part isn't the rising costs. It's how invisible the cause has become. Now is the time to pay attention. Ask who benefits. Ask who pays. Because if we don't challenge broken strategies now, we'll keep paying for them one receipt at a time. Speak up, stay informed, and vote like your job and your grocery bill depend on it, because they do.